Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast exploring sex, relationships, and liberation. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have sexological body worker Ellen. Join us for a conversation about the expansive mind-body connection. Together, we talk about the neuroplasticity of erotic pleasure, scar tissue remediation, and grounding in the presence of our breath. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Modern Anarchy. I am so delighted to have all of you pleasure activists from around the world tuning in for another episode each Wednesday. My name is Nicole. I am a sex and relationship psychotherapist with training in psychedelic integration therapy, and I am also the founder of the Pleasure Practice, supporting individuals in crafting expansive sex lives and intimate relationships. Dear listener, wow, what a special episode to be sharing with you. I mean, Ellen and I talk about being just overwhelmed by the vast need for more sex education, for more pleasure liberation. And yeah, that is something I think about all the time. I mean, dear listener, you know I grew up in a very Christian, puritanical environment if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, and the whole purity ring thing. And I'll tell you what, I still get pamphlets in the mail from my old high school, and they are still teaching the same things. And it is just wild for me to know that there are people still going through that world. There are so many people out there that are still in that world. And yeah, when you think about it, it can be rather overwhelming to think about all of the work, the social justice, the liberation of pleasure and body ownership that is needed. Whoa, yeah. I'm gonna take a deep breath for that one. Dear listener, I'm so excited to be in this space with you. I feel so devoted to the study of eroticism. I can promise you we are going to be together for a long time in this space, exploring what it means, the power it has, the pleasure that we haven't even tapped into. And I really hope that all beings can be free in their erotic power. Truly, may all beings be free in their erotic power, and may I somehow contribute to the liberation of that pleasure, dear listener. That is my hope for the universe, and I am just so, so delighted that you are here. I see you tuning in each week. I'm honored, so honored to be here in the space with you and to be growing and expanding in this space alongside you for many years to come. All right, dear listener, if you are ready to liberate your pleasure, you can explore my offerings and resources at modernanarchypodcast.com, linked in the show notes below. And I also want to say the biggest thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. You are supporting the long-term sustainability of the podcast, keeping this content free and accessible to all people. So thank you. If you want to get exclusive access into my research and personal exploration, then you can head on over to patreon.com/modernanarchypodcasts, also linked in the show notes below. And with that, dear listener, please know that I am sending you all my love. And let's tune in to today's episode. So then the first question I like to ask each guest is, how would you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Oh, well, I'm the founder of Stream, which stands for Scar Tissue Remediation, Education, and Management. And it's an educational program for people who are interested in approaching sex deeply holistically.
Mm.
We leave no stone unturned in the pursuit of extraordinary human potential.
Mm.
So we look at the psyche, we look at the body, we look at the interchange between the psyche and the body. But we really, really dive into the body, into biomechanics, into biochemistry, into the emotional body, and also into the scar body. And the scar body is fraught with a lot of habit and a lot of stuckness. And so we don't just look at physical scars, which we do learn to remediate through all kinds of exotic methods, like coffee enemas, things, fun things like
Sure.
that. But we also look at how emotional beliefs filter into postural habits, which filter into fibrotic arrangements where the jaw and the sternocleidomastoid meet, for instance. You know, who knows what lurks there?
Sure.
It's usually big. And then what keeps us jammed up, what keeps our sexual centers from communicating as well as they might.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, welcome into the space. Sounds like we're going to have a lot to talk about in the next
Oh, good.
hour.
Awesome.
Yeah. Before
Yeah.
we get into any of that, I would love to hear about you and your journey. How did you
Mhm.
get into this sort of work and this passion? Really take up the space to tell your story.
Sure. It's a long story.
I'm here for it. We got an hour.
I know. I'd like an hour. Wow. We could
Yeah.
stretch out.
And a
Okay.
therapist, so go.
I love it. So I was passionate about dancing
Hmm.
in my childhood and my teens and all the way into my mid 20s. And I'm also a person with EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I'm very hypermobile. And after I dislocated my knee for the fourth time, it was time
Oh,
to think about something else. I'm like,
sure.
okay, I can't be carried to the chiropractor one more time
Right. Oh,
because I can't walk.
so hard. Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of fell into a day job of working in electronics. My day job was managing an electronic synthesizer factory, a drum machine factory in the 80s. And it was fun. It was exciting to be in the music industry, but it wasn't exciting to run a factory. It wasn't my favorite thing. And I sort of dreamed about being a fashion designer,
Hmm.
but my dreams come true at an alarming success rate.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Love that.
So within a year, I was working for a sweater designer, and I ended up inheriting her business because
Mhm.
she basically disappeared in the middle of the night with all the money out of the bank account, the front desk, and the Rolodex,
Whoa.
leaving her partner high and dry,
Wow.
who wasn't the designer, and he couldn't really carry on without her. Meanwhile, because I was sort of running as I do, I ran the factory and I knew how to make all the sweaters. And I also had relationships with some of the stores. And they're like, well, wait a minute. Just because she's gone doesn't mean you can't make a few more of these sweaters, right? I'm like, well, I actually do know how to do that. And so, again, within 6 months, I had my own sweater company. And I
Mm.
was, then it expanded and expanded. And I was in the garment business for 15 years, but I did all my own, made all my own samples. And that means I was spending a lot of time behind a knitting machine and my back was starting to ache. And I was in my 30s and like, wait, there's got to be more to life than being stuck behind a knitting machine. And I started taking yoga. And
Mm.
as it happens, when I start doing something, I get into it. I jumped in. And then I did a yoga teacher training and I had a private with my yoga teacher. She said, oh, you're a sexual healer. I'm like, huh? What? I'm like, ooh, my big private with Anna Forrest. Oh, what is she going to do? I'm going to learn some exotic poses. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And no, she had me walk around the room. She said, just walk. I'm going to watch you walk.
Huh.
And she said, oh, I can tell by the way your sacrum moves. You're a sexual healer. And I'm like,
Whoa.
okay, I don't know what that means. I don't know where this is going, but I'll take it. And then
Yeah.
pretty soon I was teaching anatomy for her teacher trainings, and that turned into a half a career. The other half of my career was body work.
Hmm.
And I went to school and studied body work and got good at it. And then I did craniosacral training, and then I did sexological bodywork training because my bodywork teacher said somebody needs to address scar tissue in the pelvic floor because people are suffering and I can't do it. I'm a man. It's inappropriate and it wouldn't be understood, but you can do it. And I'm like, oh, niche.
Sure, yeah. There it is.
There it is. And so I thought I better find something I could use for scope of practice in California. And that was sexological bodywork at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I jumped into sexological bodywork, and pretty soon I was teaching anatomy for sexological bodywork. And Joe Kramer asked me to introduce sexological bodywork as a profession in Australia. And we went to Australia, and then we went to Canada and introduced it there. And then I got a PhD in somatic. It was supposed to be somatic sexology, but the institute where I was getting my PhD got pushback from the people who have to do with international recognition and funding for even offering the program. Oddly, the countries that have the biggest sex industries pushed back the hardest, and they collapsed the program while I was in the middle of it.
Wow.
So I ended up in somatic and spiritual psychology, which I never would have chosen. I was going to be the world's first somatic sexologist with a PhD in that subject.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen because the world wasn't ready. And that's so often the case. The world isn't ready when we start to talk about sex and making changes in the status quo.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I felt anarchic and revolutionary, but also I had put, I was halfway through my dissertation. What was I going to do? Just stop? I'm like, all right, I can live with a PhD in somatic and spiritual psychology. My dissertation it's not going to change one bit. They said, Good. Don't change a thing. Keep doing your research. Do exactly what you're going to do. And this is how you'll be a somatic sexologist in spirit, if not in academic nomenclature.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then I realized in the writing of my dissertation and the experience I had working with research subjects, because I did hands-on research with my subjects. It took a long time to find an institute that would allow me to use that research because of IRBs and
sure,
what you might expect. But I had already done the research by the time I entered the program. I had thought what I was going to be doing was taking scar tissue remediation as a self-help modality into the world, but the world was not ready in 2009 for having motherhood and scar tissue and sexuality in the same sentence. I mean, it was crickets. I was working with Jaya, who's a somatic sex educator as well.
Right.
And I had a spectacular success remediating her scar tissue in her pelvic floor. Mm. And I also worked with Kimberly Johnson, had a spectacular success remediating scar tissue in her pelvic floor. And I could see this is something that needs to be taught. I need to put it together as a training. And that's what I did. Mm. And so that's what I'm still doing, is teaching people, but I'm interested in many things. Scar tissue remediation is really only 1/4, kind of one quadrant in a holistic model that looks at biomechanics and biochemistry and the emotional body. So I have an interest in holism. I would say, overarching, scar tissue needs the most immediate attention because it's an underserved population. There was finally, I feel so vindicated. CNN comes out with this article about the needs of people postpartum who have given birth and how they're underserved and they're suffering, and all of, it's ubiquitous worldwide. They go without the care they need. Mm. And I'm like, well, duh. I've been saying 15 years, people.
Jesus.
So I'm training people and I'm seeing that we're getting remarkable results. Remarkable, because people are trained to look at the whole body, the whole system, and they have a deep tool bag of what they can use to approach problems like infertility and HPV, cervical cancers, painful penetration during intercourse, neovaginal surgery, the skin grafting involved with neo-penis surgery. There's so much that it's a huge, 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 huge area that goes underserved. the scar tissue piece, because doctors can't and won't and don't talk about scars, because guess what? They're making them. They don't want to hurt people, but they don't understand that connective tissue is living tissue. And living tissue grows, changes, morphs in reaction to things like surgery. Remodeling is real, but if there's a lot of inflammation in the body to start with, that remodeling process keeps going and going and going, and the scar gets bigger and denser, and you don't see it on the surface. Where it gets bigger and denser is inside the skin. And before you know it, there's a loss of range of motion, or an organ gets pulled out of place, or there's a change in the gait, or there's back pain, or there's a bladder issue. Things change as a result of scar tissue, but medicine doesn't recognize that, and they don't give people any tools to work with it. But that's why I created Stream, to give people tools to work with it, because scars, that's why management is in the name, because scars don't disappear. I mean, they do disappear. We can talk about that. But structural scars that have embedded in fascia take time to work with. And that's where management comes in. People can learn to manage their scars in a way that is much less painful than if they didn't do that. So that's about me.
Thank you for sharing your story and your journey to getting here. And I guess, before we even get into anything more, I just want to pause and say thank you, right?
Oh,
All the work that you were doing, like you said, the crickets, right? For future generations to have more space to have these conversations. So I really appreciate all of the time and energy that you put forward in, advancing this movement, and I'm showing up in my classes where when there's a free topic of presentation, I talk about pelvic floor therapy, and everyone in my class giggles and looks at me like, what is this wild woman who talks about sex all the time trying to share with us? And it's just why but
they don't know what they don't know.
right, and I'm trying to educate my future therapists in the room, but people like you who started this way before I even got into my training were really advancing the movement. So I guess I just want to say thank you for the work that you've done.
Oh my, it feels good to get recognized in that way. It's a sea change is happening in awareness around the reality of vulva sexuality.
Yeah.
And it's so important that this happened, because until people with vulvas are free in their genitalia, their nervous system, their pelvic nervous system, as Naomi Wolf so beautifully pointed out in her book, Vagina, until that is understood, we're not in our power. And when we come into our power in our pelvis, there is no stopping us. So I see this as part of what used to be called women's lib back when I was, a teenager. That was a long time ago. That was the 70s.
Yeah.
And I was deeply influenced by the second wave of feminism, and was radicalized when I went to get a cervical cap in Los Angeles in the 70s. We couldn't walk out of the clinic without doing a self-exam. So they're in the waiting room of the clinic. Everyone's got their doors dropped, and they've got flashlights, and they've got speculums, and they're all examining themselves. And I'm like, this is so cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. I live for a world where this is normal. And that's what another kind of motivation that happened around the development of Stream. I ran around the world for a while teaching something called sacred anatomy, women's sacred anatomy, just teaching anatomy in yoga studios of the pelvic floor. I taught at yoga conferences. I went to Australia, and I went to Europe, and I went to Asia, and I went all over the US, teaching. Guess what? We have genitals way more than you know. And it was really interesting to watch yoga studio owners kind of tweak when I told them what I wanted to do. But they wanted me to teach anatomy for their yoga teacher trainings. I'm like, not unless you let me teach all the anatomy. And I didn't combine it in a single class. I kept that kind of sequestered, because the audience needs to self-select. I don't want to be shocking anyone or traumatizing anybody who didn't think that's what they were coming for. Even though now I think it could happen. You could just teach whole body anatomy. And I think it's something that really needs to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I took a yoga teacher training as well and never got any of that conversation in it at all. Even though I was told that yoga originally was about for men, right? And managing sexual desire originally,
Yeah,
like way back.
there's a lot of poses you like where you put your heel in your
Right.
pelvic floor to
Yep.
basically deaden the nerves. Yeah.
Is that what that?
And there's
Oof.
a lot of proscription, but the real yoga, the older yoga, the yoga that preceded that, the Kali based worship yoga was about freeing the body. And that's certainly apparent if you look at the art from that period. You know, people are freely engaged in all kinds of exotic positions, Kama Sutra wise, that are impossible unless you do some flexibility training. So clearly it went both ways. We can
Sure.
turn it on and we can turn it off in terms of our availability for a sexual sensation.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I'm really interested in is sex as a road to increasing neuroplasticity,
Sure.
because we do have a whole pelvic brain, so to speak, a nervous system. And I think it's underappreciated for its capacity to shift our allegiance to the way our entire autonomic nervous system works. I mean, I
Sure.
have a lot of really big ideas and I'm interested in pursuing them. And I'm so pleased to be training sexological body workers in anatomy to get them to ask bigger questions than just what's a new way to get off. You
Hmm.
know, like how can we change our entire nervous system and our allegiance to upregulation, downregulation, and manage our autonomic capacities, not manage in a let's make it smaller and get so stuck in a box of regulatory behaviors,
Sure.
but how can we extend? How can we expand? How can we become bigger, more flexible emotionally, people, by expanding our sexual capacities for relaxation
Hmm.
and for excitation. We can, I mean, it's right there in our genitals. We have the possibility of really going to much bigger, deeper, more outlandish places. And this is the one place I can really talk about that freely,
Yes.
perhaps.
Yes. Yes, it
So let's
is.
get into it.
Absolutely. Where do we start that conversation for you? I was thinking about trust, letting go of shame, expanding the breath, but take me where your brain is going. What are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that the minute we change hands when we self pleasure, we're in a different neuroplastic space. People are like, oh, it would take forever if I changed hands. It's awkward. It doesn't feel good. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly where you need to be, in that space of awkward discomfort and exploring yourself anew, and pay attention to the sensation that is available instead of the same old way you've always, quote, done it, unquote, to get to the same result you've always gotten. If it takes more time, what would happen? Maybe you'd actually have more time for arousal to build rather than bypassing a whole potential for sensation. That's just, a tiny example. And I've had many people come to me who say, oh, well, I can only get off if I straighten my right leg and turn it in and really, really tighten that leg. I can't roll over into orgasm until I have that gesture, but my back hurts and my leg hurts and it's ruining my pelvis. I have chronic pain as a result of
Mm.
this masturbation habit. I'm like, well, we can change that. We
Hmm.
don't have to get stuck there.
Right.
Yeah. So getting people to do things in an unusual way.
Hmm. Yeah, which was making me just think about, creating more space for the exploration of this under systems of capitalization, right? Where we're in such a productivity mode where it's like, I got to get this orgasm out because I've got 5, 10, 20 minutes. That's it. So there's just no space mentally to even say, wow, what if we could explore, right? And actually spend the time getting comfortable
Yeah.
with that other hand. But it's
Yeah.
part of that.
Let's just say sex and arousal begins at 45 minutes. And there's nothing wrong with quickies, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But 45 minutes is actually what's required for all of the erectile tissue beds to come to the point of full engorgement for many people. Not everyone. You can train your body to engorge very quickly. I learned that with Jaya. She could engorge and get to orgasm in 15 seconds. I watched her do it, and she did it publicly for people. It
Right.
was part of her early career. But that's not the point. The point is, how do we inhabit all of the potential along the way in terms of allowing our body to feel all the sensation? We bypass so much, the particular activating system at the back in the brainstem is like an aperture that opens and closes. I think full aperture open for sexual sensation instead of full aperture, more data trying to squeeze through, and that being the excitatory impulse that drives one into orgasm is the pressure of too much sensation and too little time that keeps presenting the genital sneeze, because that's all the body could actually manage, instead of a full-blown full body, inclusive, surfing, waving, squirting orgasm that rolls on for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Tantra points at this, and some Tantra teaches this, but Tantra is so fraught and has such a bad rap in terms of the isolation of gender roles, unfortunately.
Right.
It's unnecessary. We can take the learning for the autonomic nervous system and utilize it regardless of our gender allegiance, right? I mean, slowing down is slowing down no matter what genitals you're wearing and how you identify. But slowing down is important in order to be inclusive of our entire nervous system.
Right. Exactly. And so I'm curious then, when you're helping people to expand to, the different hand or seeing the space of 90 minutes, where do you start people? Because I imagine there's a lot of pushback on this.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of pushback. There's, I can't and I won't. I'm like, here, let me show you something. Because I'm a sexological body worker, I also work with orgasmic meditations. I'll just stroke the clitoris and say, there's no agenda here. I'm going to stroke for 15 minutes because this is new to many people. Just pure sensation, pay attention.
Right.
We start with that because it's a very good mindfulness practice.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that with somebody and they go, wait, I already had an orgasm. You're going to keep stroking? And I'm like, 15 minutes is 15 minutes. We're going to explore. We're going to explore what's on the other side of that. We're going to feel into the, I can't, I'm done. What happens on the other side? You will never know yourself unless you look beyond what you think your capacity is. So we do. And that is, I'm like, okay, now I want you to think about doing this for yourself. And people do. And then now I want you to try it with your other hand. Right. So there's ways you can build a bridge from where somebody is. I meet people where they are.
Right.
I meet them in their pushback, but I also will take care of that pain in that leg or their back or their pelvic floor or their tailbone, because I'm a body worker and I know how to do that. And I'm like, okay, here's the option. You can keep doing what you're doing and getting what you're getting. And I'll show you what it's like not to have that, so you can remember what it is to be pain-free. Okay, that was a neuroplastic shift that we made with your fascia and your nerves and the place they interface all over legs, low back, psoas, et cetera, et cetera. Now that you see that pain isn't a necessary ingredient, what are you going to change the pattern? People come to me saying, I've only been able to have an orgasm if I lay face down, because that's how they learn to self-pleasure, because so they wouldn't be seen. I'm just sleeping, Mom. Even
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a tough one to break, but it is, people can accomplish that, but they have to go slow and they have to be willing to feel really awkward.
Right. Yeah. I think sometimes a good metaphor thinking about neuroplasticity is, when you're out in the wilderness and you've been walking that one path and walking that one path of your neuronal pathways, it clears, right? And how easy to just walk down this one path. And if you want to go out, it's an uncleared path. You're having to cut, the branches out of the way, and that discomfort then of creating those new neuronal pathways, or it's uncomfortable. And like you said, you won't know what's on the other side until you actually push past that.
Exactly. Push past it or explore inside of it. There's those moments of panic, like, I don't know what happens next.
Yeah.
And that's really, it's the fear of the unknown that keeps people stuck in dysfunctional patterns or barely okay enough patterns. It's like, why can't we have extraordinary experiences instead of kind of, well, that was nice. Next, time to do the laundry. Or I was thinking about the laundry instead of whatever.
Right. Absolutely. I know it's interesting, just the people who aren't as, interested in sex. Of course, there's asexual people, but the people who are just like, I don't know about sex. I'm like, what are you doing? There's a lot of pleasure over there. Like, what are you doing in that space?
That's right. Well, what is the capacity of the human nervous system? What is the capacity for sex to change our nervous system and expand it so we become bigger, more interesting, more diverse internally? How about some internal diversity?
Absolutely. And as you were saying that, I was starting to think about trauma and the way that that impacts the, body and the brain. So many of us have experienced sexual trauma. It's so normal, unfortunately, in our world. And so just thinking about, what capacities your body is able to go to when your body is in that defense mode of squeezing and tight and that tensity. Yeah, you're nodding. You want to speak to that?
Absolutely. So, unlearning patterns of trauma, which have to do with hiding, which have to do with shame, we
Yeah.
have to come back and look at the relationship between shame and sexuality
Right.
and how shame, and don't get me wrong, shame and kink have exquisite relationship that's worthy of a deep exploration. But unconscious shame that turns into body patterning around hiding our genitals, hiding our pleasure, hiding our hand, giving ourselves pleasure, that can be unlearned. But we have to establish safety. And there's so much work to do before we even get to sexuality when we're unpacking shame in the body.
Hmm.
We start with breathing. How does shame impact our breath if we can't breathe?
Yeah.
Breathing is the way we open the channels that go from the brain into the pelvic floor and the genitals. But if our breathing is constricted by unconscious shaming or feeling small or a hiding pattern that, a rounded upper back, a
Right.
collapsed chest, the sternum poking into, restricting the diaphragm and its excursion,
Hmm. Hmm.
we can change that. I mean, having a background in yoga was so helpful because the yoga I studied was all about neuroplasticity. That was Anna Forrest's whole point in the beginning when I was studying with her way back in the 90s around we can shift, we can change. Devote your entire attention for this class to a spot. Pick a spot, any spot in your body. Devote every breath to that spot. Notice how you feel at the beginning, notice how you feel at the end. Doing that, over years really proved to me how the focus of attention can shift awareness and physiology of low back pain or a bladder infection, or I think I'm getting a cold, or I think I have this pain in my knee. Giving it 90 minutes of intensive attention and breath would shift the pain again and again. So I realized it's an attentional matter, how we organize our attention. And that's such a big subject these days with ADHD and ADD and all of the neurodiversities it has to do with the ability or even addiction to our devices, our mobile phones, etc. They are capitalism and the diffusion of attention go
Yeah.
hand in hand. And don't get me started on what the political consequences of that.
Yes.
They're big, but so are the physiologic consequences of that. And so I predict yoga has the potential for yet another deep resurgence. People are realizing that their attention is fractured, and a great way to learn to focus gently and include the body, bring the body along, is yoga. And I think that yoga is undergoing a morphogenesis to develop into something bigger and less dogmatic than the yoga that came here in the 60s and 70s and way before. I mean, yoga came to this country in the 20s, and even in the late 1800s, people were coming from India and people were exploring these, doing postures. But all the dogma and the religion and the sort of inherent wrong information needs to be examined in the light of what's physiologically possible.
Hmm.
Yoga can be a great liberator. It is one of the most, I mean, Qigong, there are many practices that are about changing our autonomic allegiance. What I mean by that is, are we addicted to distraction and upregulation?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. Right? Yes. Most of us are, right? In
right. So
that
we need to
way.
change that because we
Mhm.
can't take time for our sexuality to blossom if we're addicted to distraction and upregulation. So we have
Mhm.
to change that. That's what I'm talking about, the neuroplastic changes that sexuality can bring. I think it could absolutely reverse distraction and chronic upregulation because in order to have those kinds of deep rolling 90-minute orgastic experiences can't happen until we change our minds. We really have to change our mind. And we have to open up the Cartesian divide between the head and the body. That's part of it.
Yeah, I feel like we are stepping towards a world where we're no longer seeing it like that. Although, again, given maybe that's because your training and my specific training where I've gone kind of have led us here. But in my actual doctoral training for clinical psychology, there's been nothing on the body. So I don't want to get I know I don't want to get too excited. I think it's because I've been working with psychedelic therapy. So I've gotten a lot of somatic work there, given just, when you're in that non-specific amplifier state, the amount of things that come up in the body, or even, even on drugs like ketamine, which are that dissociative, like some clients with trauma will still have feelings in the body, right? And so, given my yoga background, I do a lot of work with clients there of how do we open up, how do we connect in that sort of space. But yeah, in my actual clinical training, there's been nothing about the body. So I don't want to get too excited, but I do think,
Well, but that's up to you, isn't it? Really, I mean, it's up to
yeah,
us
yeah,
as people who are writing dissertations
right.
to be bold, and defend the fuck out of our ideas
Yeah.
using the available literature because it's all there. It's
Hmm.
all there. There was nothing on scar tissue in the pelvic floor until I wrote a dissertation about it. I'm like, how the hell am I going to do any research? There's nothing to support it because no one talks about it.
Hilarious. Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah. My dissertation was on relationship anarchy, and there was nothing on it. So it was one of those like, okay, here we go. I guess I'll define it, like start with the simple blocks of what this is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now we're moving forward past that. But I can so deeply hear the mind work of being present and feeling, and how that level of pleasure in the body is so deeply connected to a political movement of awareness and actually feeling the systems that we're under and the pain of that, so that we're actually moved to act rather than this distracted, numbed out state of constant dopamine from social media, right?
Right. That's right. It's hard. I find myself running super hot and cold about social media. Sometimes I get into it, get on it, and then I realize what it's doing to my brain. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't conscience this. Goodbye. And I just
Yeah.
walk away. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, nobody knows who I am anymore. Oh my God, I'm disappearing. I gotta get back on social. Ah!
Right.
It's like it's selling your soul to the devil.
I know.
And trying to find a balanced, sane relationship with it is it's a struggle, at least for me.
Yeah, I look at it like a drug, right? It's a
It
very
is a drug.
right,
It's
I have
absolutely a drug.
a complex relationship to it, and I have to be careful when I start to use it and keep using it and then wanting to use it, and I'm like, well, okay, maybe I need a tolerance break, we're going to take a step away. And exactly, friends and community and how all of that pulls you into it, right? So I think that's really important. And yeah, I'm also curious too what your views are on impact and kink. I know that, in my own exploration, a lot of my research, there's so much opening of sensation that you can do through that sort of play. And I'm also curious about maybe the opposite side, right? Kink is beautiful, healthy, drugs, beautiful, healthy, but they always have that other side to it, right? Where it can get complex, complicated
Oh,
relationships.
deeply. Yes. But
Yeah,
there's nothing to put you into the parasympathetic of subspace like a good flogging.
right,
Right.
right.
And what's wrong
Absolutely.
with that? But not everyone goes there. They have to be aware of who they are before they enter that space. And they need to negotiate. And that's the beauty of kink is it is such an externalized negotiation.
Mhm.
When you drop a contract with a dom and you're in the sub position, or if you are a dom, that be taking responsibility for the very deep specificity of those kinds of contracts about permission and the agreed upon boundaries of where you are, what you want, how do you want it, even having the conversation of what do I want and how do I want it meted out over this period of time. Boundary, 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 boundary. It is good training for relationships, in
Mhm.
my
I
opinion.
know. Yeah, communication skills. I've learned so much from being in kink community, just about, yeah, where my boundaries are and how to name those and even just know what those are, right? That's a whole process. I guess my question too is what I'm just going to speak from my lived experience, right? When you continue to go into that space of high intensity, not just flogging, but sexual contact that is very high intensity, and wow, the orgasms that can come from that. Whoa. And then trying to slow back down to a more sensual space has been a
Right.
little bit of a shift.
Exactly. But that is the neuroplastic opportunity
Okay.
here, is
Yeah.
to be conscious about it and say, okay, I'm stepping away from the high intensity
Right.
into the slow intensity.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with slow intensity, but this is who we are and who we can be. We can choose where our allegiance lies. And having our allegiance go back into deep parasympathetic as a legitimate sexual place to explore. I mean, deep subspace will certainly take you there,
Sure.
can take you there. So it's like any dopamine alliance.
Yeah.
You have to watch it carefully
Right.
because it becomes very addictive.
Yeah. What does that balance look like? Do you have any recommendations?
Well, it's just recognizing that you're there, first of all. Like,
Yeah.
oh, gee, I can't even get off unless I have on my special stilettos or I have on my vinyl or, whatever that thing is that signals I'm in sexual space now to oneself unless I have an other person who's managing the space for me or for whom I am managing the space. Like, wait a minute, whatever happened to the self with self relationship here? And
Hmm.
that self with self relationship can be tuned to the high intensity frequency, or it can be tuned to the broad intensity frequency, the broad, slow, deep intensity frequency. I mean, we have to take responsibility for I call it the primacy of our ANS, our autonomic nervous system. Where do we tune in? What channel do we tune into? When we're only stuck on one channel, that requires a good look and what are what's the payback for remaining allegiant to only one channel?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, again, if we maybe think about it like substances, right? There's a lot of beauty in going into that, with psychedelics, going into that space of non-specific amplifier, of feeling the joy of that and the intensity of that. But does that then cause your ordinary consciousness to feel dull and boring? And if that's where we
Oh, I don't
are,
think so. I think so. Here's what I think.
right,
I think it lays a template. No matter what
of
substance we're taking,
course.
the reason we respond to it is because we already know how. What I've discovered was that body work could take me any place that
Yeah,
ayahuasca or DMT or ketamine or opiates, especially opiates, could take me. I had a little issue. I mean, I know I could speak to this very
sure.
from
Yeah,
personal experience. I
yeah.
was addicted to opium. We grew mushrooms for a long time and had a beautiful trade going with a lovely Persian man
Hmm.
who had this exquisitely, like, tastes like smoking Tootsie Rolls, delicious opium. And I imbibed frequently because we had plenty of it.
Sure.
And then I realized, oh, I have a little problem because I got sick when I stopped. And I'm like, wait a minute, okay. And then I gave it up because I didn't want to be reliant on anything, even though I was, a deep psychedelic warrior again, back in the 90s, doing ayahuasca and, following Terrence McKenna around and befriending ultimately and going to Hawaii and noticing the plants and finding out,
Sure.
oh, look, you didn't think you could grow Psychotria viridis. Viridis, it's coming up all around your feet. Look at those little pieces of leaves that you've been pruning. They're all turning into plants.
Hmm.
That was sort of an amazing moment. It was astonishing, actually. But I turned away from it when I discovered yoga. And because I was finding that I could approximate some of those states doing pranayama. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. I didn't know I could go here on the natch. And then I met the man who became my teacher, who stuck his thumb under my shoulder blade. And it was a full on opiate experience. I'm
Wow.
like, oh my God, okay. I'm not stopping until I learn how to do this, because everyone needs to know that they don't need the substance. It's already within them. The substance just opens the door, forms a template for what our nervous systems already know how to do, provided we don't have a lot of blockage in the way. If you're on 3 antidepressants and, pain medication and a blood pressure med and a statin, not going to happen.
Right,
They've
exactly.
already hijacked your sensitivity.
Mhm.
But if you're pretty open, pretty clean in your blood, we have no idea who we are. in terms of what we can self-generate in terms of state change. We just need the right inputs. And that's what kink provides so exquisitely if we're not blocked by substances of other kinds.
Right, right. Powerful story for you. And I'm just thinking then, knowing everything that you do know in your journey with all of this, how do you play with pleasure currently? I'm sure your brain has so much that is going through it, the books, the ideas as you are in that space. So how do you get there?
I play with autonomic states.
Yeah.
I do a lot of enema play. That's fun for me.
Yeah.
That's really a very interesting edge. I play with masturbation while retaining enemas. And I trained my body to squirt and retain at the same time. Like I can keep coffee in and
Sure.
expel. I mean, these are weird little, very particular and odd, I don't know, you could call it kink, I suppose. Self with self kink. It's just a curiosity. It's like, is this even possible? I don't know. I'm going to try it. Oh yeah, it's possible. And not only that, it feels kind of wild and good. Okay, what's next?
Yeah. Exactly. That continual exploration then for you.
Yes, right. And to be completely honest, my sexual appetite basically evaporated when I had a hysterectomy. And that's not true of everybody, but it was true for me. And I had to think long and hard about getting a hysterectomy. I had
Mm.
endometrial cancer, not very much, a tiny, tiny, tiny amount, but I could not find in California a doctor who would allow me to watch it and see if I could reverse it. The
Mm.
minute cancer is present, the standard of care says you must get a hysterectomy.
Wow.
There was no surgeon, there was no choice.
Wow.
There was no surgeon who would allow any other outcome. And so I thought, well, I could just not go to doctors, because if the doctor knows you have cancer and you're not getting, they'll just drop you as a patient.
Really?
They won't even watch you. And so I said, okay, I have more important things to do than play the, gee, I don't know I have cancer, how big is it game of going from imaging house to imaging house, from doctor to doctor. I didn't want to do that. I'm like, okay, I want to start stream. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to just get the hysterectomy and zip, my sexuality just evaporated.
Yeah.
But I explore in many other ways. And maybe my sexuality will come back online at some point. I don't know, but I've been pretty busy making stream. It's been an all-consuming process since I rebooted it in 2020. It's making media and learning to edit and learning to animate and learning to use all the channels and all the things that you do when you run an online business. As a boomer generation person, it doesn't come naturally to me. So it's
Sure.
a lot of always new, always new, always new. So I wouldn't say I sacrificed my sexuality on the altar of stream. That's not the point. The point is the two things happen concurrently. I got really busy with one thing, and I actually think a lot of the sexual exploration I did provided the diving board for me to take flight with stream.
Mm.
It funded me energetically and my creativity. It's like somebody opened the tap on my creativity and it has never closed.
Sure. Absolutely. So yeah, thank you for that work. And I'm sure that, that was a shift in your identity. I could imagine, right? Going from all the work that you were doing then to having that change in your connection, but then to redirect it and the meaning of that, right?
It has to do with meaning. That's really the word. That's the key word here, is making meaning. The meaning I'm making of the work I'm doing is my life's work. And it feels like a unique contribution. And that's what I came here to do. I have no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since 1997, when Anna said, oh, you're a sexual healer. I'm like, yeah, not just for me, for everybody.
Yeah.
And until we understand the role of scars in sexual expression, my work is not done.
Right. Right. And how would you describe that role?
I think it has to do with teaching. There's so much information that people don't have, and it gets easy to get overwhelmed by it. But the only way you start is to start. So every person who comes to me who's got a question about scar tissue, I ask them if they've been genitally mapped, and
Mm.
the answer is rarely yes. So we start there. When I'm working with people one on one, and I'm teaching now students to do genital mapping, and now I wrote the scripts for genital mapping for sexological body work back in 2010. So now thousands and thousands and thousands of people I introduced anatomy as an important aspect of sexuality because how do we know what we're talking about? Whether it would, that little thing that like goes over your clitoris, that's called a hood. It has
Right.
a function, it has a place. We have to have a common language as sexological body workers, as an organization and as an entity. So we all know what we're talking about. Therefore, anatomy is critical.
Right.
So that's what I mean by you teach. You
Mhm.
teach and you teach and you teach. So the collective can start to have a discourse that is set on a commonly held language. Without that, there's a problem. And I'm not saying people can use whatever language they want, but we also need to understand there's common meanings for a vestibular bulb or a perineal sponge or the way the periurethral ducts have sphincters that open and close. you know
Mhm. Right.
we're going to build a bridge ever to conventional medicine. We got to start on their side of the language barrier.
Sure, absolutely. And how are you supposed to describe what you want when you don't even know the word for the part that you want to be touched, right? Like, what
Or
do
you
you?
don't yes that you or you don't even know that you have the part, more tragically, and this is often the case, right? People know they have a clitoris, but they didn't know I didn't know I had a hood on my clitoris until I was fucking 47. Whoa.
Right. Or even where it's located and in terms of below or above the urethra. Some people just don't know that. I'm like, whoa.
Right. That's right. They don't know, and plus people's urethras in so many locations. Sometimes it's inside, sometimes it's outside. They're introitus. And so how do you talk about it when there's so much variation? Because you can't say there's no such thing as a landmark. The only thing we have that we can reliably identify are bones. All the soft tissue can be in any configuration because if somebody's intersex or somebody, the variation is infinite. So trying to talk about where things are, it's only experiential. And that's why people need to be mapped individually because their own confirmation is special to them, specific to them. Yeah. And it's all normal. It's all normal. Variation and genetic diversity is the way our species got here. So we need to embrace it.
Yeah, and we see it out in nature all the time, right? The leaves all look different, and we look at each leaf and we're like, wow, it's so beautiful. And they're not these cookie cutter examples of the same thing, but so many of us have such deep shame the second we feel like we're not the norm, right?
There is no norm. Our norm is
Right.
constructed by pornography, excuse me. That's
Right.
enraging, but true.
Hmm.
And how many porn stars have had their labial lips clipped? Lots of them is the answer. And so what we're considering normal is surgically created. So, okay.
Right, which is making my brain just already think about how we have AI coming out with images. And so I think we both know a future of AI pornography where you can type in, hey, I want to see this.
Oh, it's already happening. And it's not just AI, it's happening in 3D. Sex robots, you can get them any confirmation, any configuration, any, shape of eye and color of skin and probably accent eventually because they talk. And so, right, AI and sexuality is hilarious because AI will never understand sexuality, never, ever, ever, because it will not. I mean, this is where I feel sort of, in one way, a little desolate about our future because if AI is moving the way it does, things will be concentrated and normalized more and more because that's what computers do. Individual quirkiness and variation will separate us from AI,
Right.
will keep us and allow us to maintain our integrity as creative beings. There's a difference between creativity via iteration and creativity through our own internal spark. And my allegiance is with the latter.
Of course. Yeah, I know. And I'm definitely, afraid of the world of AI therapists too, right? Coming from my profession and stuff. But I think there's so much, at least for me, when I think about that world, there's so much beauty in knowing that if, the difference being that my consciousness, my experience would be in the soul of another human being, and that is not replicable, right, with AI. And so even in terms of sexuality and play in this, to know that I'm doing that with another conscious human being who's going to hold my story and hold all the unique, like you said, edges and, little quirks of my being, that is the beauty for me. So I'm going to hold on to hope that that is going to hold us through, but we're about to go through some rocky waters.
It'll be very interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And, for the person who has heard you talk a little bit about scar tissue and this experience, is there anything that you'd want to say to them directly who's maybe wondering if this is something they should explore or learn more about?
You mean people who are interested in learning how to remediate scar tissue?
Yeah. Or if they
Oh,
have
sure.
it, or if they even have it, what if
If they
someone
have
doesn't
it, well,
know?
people come to scars through direct experience or indirect experience. People who have scars end up wanting to study them because they want to understand what they can do. And their own experience is so dramatic when they start to remediate their scars. They're like, oh, I don't have to live with breath restrictions for having had top surgery.
Sure.
Oh, I don't have to have chronic pain. Oh, I can have pleasurable penetration with this neo vagina, and it doesn't have to be with a dilator. And there are erectile tissue pieces inside of this beautiful constructed new anatomy that still talk to the pleasure centers in my brain. How do I find them? So, yes, people who learn about this often get fascinated and want to study it. And I'm here to teach that. I'm here to teach. People can reach out to me via my website, scartissueremediation.com. I'm eager to help, but not just physical scars, also scars in the realm of the unseen. Scar tissues that have to do with shame or beliefs or meaning making that's limited, that wants to expand. I mean, people know there's more, but they don't know how to get there. But I respect holistic inclusion incredibly deeply. It is sort of my MO. And so when you teach people holistic inclusion, they start to discover new worlds. I don't know a single student. I've had about 50, 60 people come through my program now, and they are different people at the end than they were
Mm.
at the beginning. It changes them because they are actively working on scar tissue through conditioning and scar tissue in their body and even scar tissue inside their intestines,
Right,
like how
right.
their gut flora operates. You don't come out of this holistic inclusion approach to study without understanding where the blockage is and what you can do about it in terms of embodied autonomy. In terms of inner authority, you need to actually believe that that's valuable, and that those are pillars of what I teach. Is how can we take responsibility for our health at the deepest level?
Mm. So, so powerful, the work that you're doing to really change the world and our access to pleasure.
Well, it begins self with self, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Which, thinking about self, if you were to look back on your younger self, is there anything that you would want to say to her before she started this journey, before she knew all the wisdom that you do now? I know, right?
I think I would tell her not to worry.
Yeah, say
It's going to
more.
be fine.
Yeah. Was there a lot of worry about pleasure and access to
There
this?
was a lot of worry about what I would do if I lost my identity as a dancer,
Mm,
because that was my identity. It was my entire identity.
sure.
And so I never considered being a fashion designer an identity. It's just something I happened to be I was good at, and it paid the bills. And it was working for myself doing that sure beat, you know, making drum machines.
Sure. Sure.
But when I discovered health, healing, and the potential of the human nervous system, I mean, I wouldn't have started without ayahuasca. Ayahuasca took me on a guided tour of my intestines in hyperspace
Mm,
along, back in the mid 90s. And I'm like, whoa, okay, I think I can learn anatomy because it's already showing it to me in excruciating, exquisite psychedelic detail. I can do something with this. And it was a beautiful teacher,
mm,
a beautiful teacher.
yeah.
So I started worrying less when I started taking psychedelics. I mean, I worried about certain things like, getting busted
Right, right, right.
growing in our attic.
Exactly, exactly.
But, now I live in Oregon where psychedelic therapy is legal. And that blows my mind every time I think about it. It just is amazing to me. It's like I have lived through an amazing transformation of what's available and possible for human consciousness. And it's a beautiful doorway. And we need to bring the body along.
Absolutely, which is why I'm so thankful for your work and all that you're doing to bring that paradigm and to bring those two things together for our pleasure and our healing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, what a delightful conversation.
Yeah, it was so good. I'm curious too, before we close anything, I always like to, like take a deep breath and feel into if maybe there's anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners. Otherwise, I have a closing question, but I like to create that space too.
Scar tissue remediation is important. And it's a unique window to look into the psyche, the body, and the mind body interface and ask that question: is there anything here that's creating blockage? If there is, what can I do to dissolve it? There are always ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you named a couple of different people, but even correct me if I'm wrong too, but like scar tissue from birth, right? From sexual traumas, from just not being ready enough and experiencing penetration, right? It's a really expansive
Yeah,
space.
scar tissue from that time you fell off your skateboard, scar
Mm,
tissue from the time you slipped and hit your pubic bone on the diving board on the way off. All of those sports injuries or gymnastics, or, it goes on and on. The scars happen I've heard thousands and thousands of stories now about how people attain scars from hernia surgery 3 days after birth, right? Bodies respond to scar remediation. And if we think about the scar as at least as important as what we eat, what our psyche contains, and how flexible we are, or how able our bodies are, or how disabled our bodies are, scars are huge. They are just as important. And that was my training. And people don't think about it that way. People think, oh, scar is just a thing on my skin. It's much bigger than that.
yes, absolutely. I'm so thankful for your work. I feel this need to bow, like this just level of, just like so much knowledge that you have in this area. And so I'm really thankful to have you on the show and that people got, a little bit into your world of this powerful work that you're doing for humanity.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share. I'm curious to hear your closing question.
Yeah. What is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
What I wish was more normal was that people were eager to cross the Cartesian divide. I wish that were normal. I wish people were willing to take the journey into their body and explore every atom in the space between the atoms of their body. That's what I wish was more normal,
Yeah.
instead of living in the constructed reality of what's pointed at them from a screen.
hmm Absolutely. And I think as a psychotherapist myself, I'm trying to let that sink in because for the last 5 years, I've been taught to think about the mind, the mind, the mind, the mind, the mind, the mind. Work with your client on the
Guess
mind.
what? Yes, but the mind, conscious and unconscious, right? Guess what the unconscious mind is? It's called the body. The body is the unconscious mind. It's part of us. The mind lives in the body. It's the subcortical nervous system. That is the mind and the body.
I know. I was in like a neuropsychology class and we're talking about cortisol, adrenaline, and it's like, but we never talk about how would you work with clients in that. No, it's just like think CBT, CBT. And I'm just like,
Oh no, no, no. Oh Lord. Oh, that's so sad.
I know it is, it is, it is. And so for me, every time I'm in a client session of therapy, the tendency is to want to process all things so cognitively, but I'm trying to remember the importance of just
Okay, so
even,
let's just replace the C and CBT with B, body behavioral therapy. What would that look like?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's so much power in even just asking, my clients when they tell me something of a difficult experience. Okay, let's pause. Where are you feeling this in the body? Just even life changing, right? To get that neural pathway going for them, for so many people that are so drastically disconnected to their bodies. And I know we have a lot of therapists that listen to this podcast. So I just hope that I can invite them even to incorporate even that small question into the work, right? To start to change the sort of movement so we can get to a cognitive body therapy, right? Rather
Yes,
than
cognitive body therapy or body inclusive therapy.
yeah, something.
Yeah, we need it dearly.
Absolutely. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sharing all of your wisdom with me and all of the listeners.
What a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. For anyone who wants to find you, work with you, connect with you, where do you want to plug so that they can find your stuff?
Okay, you can go to the website scartissueremediation.com. I have a personal website, ellenhe.com, that talks about my approach to health. It's very holistic, inclusion based. And then you can find me on Instagram and you can find me on Facebook. But better to find me, you'll get an answer sooner because I am very spotty in my social media engagement. But I always get I attend to my inbox daily.
Sure.
So scartissueremediation.com will take you to my inbox.
Great. Well, thank you, Ellen, for joining us again.
Oh, deep pleasure.
If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to get resources and learn more about all the things we talked about on today's episode. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.